also has to be alive. We said that's Exer Shav. Now we're learning it from a different place. But after that, literally the top line. The Pasuk says that you should take out the entire cow and burn it. And there we're discussing a power of Pa'al and Dover Shot Sibur. And there it uses the word power, even though the cow is dead. So we see. So if it's Kolapor, full stop, that's the question. It says Kolapor and the cow is dead. So we see that the word power is even referring to a dead cow. It says, well, you got no raya. Sheyotzias kuloi. The Torah wanted to emphasize Kolapor to tell you that you have to take out the entire cow, and that is the main message of what the thing. That means like this. The Torah says, essentially Rashi doesn't bother to explain. The second Torah was that when it says kolapor, the Torah has to say par because it wants to teach us that you take everything out and you don't leave anything behind, and everything has to go b'chutz hamachna to be burnt. So what then brings another pasuk, which is now referring to actually that the par and serve Yom Kippur. There's par achatos achatos, and there it's referring to you should take them out of the camp, and there it's referring to the par and serve Yom Kippur. Omar Papa, ba'oyu basu perish to kulam eloi pligi. When we're talking about the most of the cow, when you've got the skin, the flesh, the insides, so then that definitely everybody agrees that's called a cow. Because at the end of the day, you've got a vast majority of the cow. Ki pligi bedam. The machlokus is when all you've got is blood. Ma'asov adam ikri pow. They're just blood alone. That's what they call the cow. Ma'asov adam lo ikri pow. So you can't compare to this case when we're talking about when you're taking out the limbs, you're taking out the skin and everything else. So there, everybody agrees that that's called power. But here, when you're just taking out the blood, that's the shaila. Omavash, we start with
about switch from live dead to we agree it can be dead. Okay.
Yes, very good. We switch from live dead to whether just a small part, just blood, is considered power. Omavash, mistabik ma'adom adamiki power. The first, almost the first pasuk when the Torah talks about Ana Kohen coming in the Kodesh HaKadosh, it says, "V'zos yove Ana la Kodesh is coming to the Kodesh with power and boko." Atu v'kane maile. Is it going to walk into the Kodesh with a horn, holding it literally to a cow? Of course not. Ela b'domoi v'kolei power. So God says, "V'edoch b'ma huchsha Ana la Kodesh with power and boko lechatos." Meaning like this: when the Torah says, "V'zos yove Ana la Kodesh with power," do we mean what he comes into the Kodesh with? And then we're only talking about the blood, because in the Kodesh HaKadosh he only comes with the blood. Or do we mean the Zosya Kodesh with what preparation? What does he need to have gone through in order that he should be able to go into the Kodesh HaKadosh? And then the Torah says, B'par, if he has a cow which belongs to him and he prepared, then he can go into the Kodesh. And that is the Machlokas, and the Gemara is not patient. So right, so we've left it as a machlokas. Let's summarize the machlokas. The Kohen Gadol got up. He did all that avoid of that big dissolve. Then he changed to big to Lavan. He did one vidui. Then he did the lottery. Then he went back and did another vidui. And then he went and shechted the cow. And then he died. The question is, the next Kohen Gadol that takes over the scan, is he going to take over where the Kohen Gadol left off, meaning just to Zvika, or does he need to shecht the cow again? This is a machloikas, and the Gemara does not machriya one way or another. Fake the Gemara. The taper clay, there's another problem. Forget about par and domishal par. There's a much bigger problem. The chatos shemesu ba'alehi, the chatos shemesu ba'aleh misa osla. This cow is actually a chatos. How do you know it's a chatos? Because he did vidui on it for himself once. What was the second time he did vidui? For the Kohen. So it's a proper chatos. And the halacha is a chatos where the owner dies. We make the animal die. And it's possible. And it's possible. What? Who's the owner? Well, must be not the whole Kaisel, that you can't say. Maybe the Kohen. That's the big shayla we're going to discuss. Now, is it the Kohen or the Kohen?
He says for himself as well.
So the question is, so that is the next shayla more. Just it's very important to remember there are 5 chatois where we have to lock them into a room. And every time I say it, people ask me, what about Saba L'chaim? The answer is that there's no greater joy to the chatos than to be used in this purpose. What are the 5 chatois that you have to lock them into the room until they die? So the way to remember it is vertimno. Vov is vlad chatos, chatos baby. It comes up a few times in this Gemara, next daf or two. So if you've got them all clear in your mind, it makes it too much easier. Vlad chatos as a baby. What about, let's say, Vlad oilo? Does anybody know what's the din? No, the Vlad oilo can never have a baby because an oilo can only come as male. So it's only by a chatos is possible. Okay, except for maybe nowadays with all the political correctness, can have male, female, but Beis, not on YouTube. Actually, YouTube's probably got worse things. Vlad chatos is the first one. Tov is tmuras chatos. That's very clear. If you take a chatos, if the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur stands in front of his car and says zeh tmuras zeh, so then the tmura dies. Mem is chatos shemesu ba'aleh, where the owner died, which is our Gemara over here. Nun is nevdo chatos, where basically the chatos got lost. You provide it with an ayin. And you got another one, so now you've got two. And ayin is over shnosa, where it passed its year. If it's past a year old, the halacha is that it has to die. I mean, let's say I do not have a stick on Shabbos. I light a candle on Shabbos. So I separate a sheep as a chatos, and I separated less than a year old. And then what happens is I didn't get a chance to bring it to be so big dosh. I didn't get around to take it, and it's already more than a year old. So halacha is we lock the chatos in the room after a new chatos. That's the 5. It's important to remember that there's many shittas that hold that if there's one is not possible, none of them are possible. Meaning that for whatever reason, one of these 5 doesn't apply, then none of the 5 apply. We'll come to it maybe in a minute. Okay, so these are the 5 chatos Beis. Who cares whether it's dam chatos is, whether pa is dam pa or whether pa is not dam pa? Who cares? Because either way, the Kohen Gadol just died. If the Kohen Gadol died, so now he's the owner of the chatos. So now we have to lock up the chatos. It's a possible chatos. He can't use it at all. And of course, the next Kohen Gadol is going to have to bring a new one. So let's the Gemara inside. But take the chatos Beis Balei, chatos Beis Balei lemisa oz. Omalei Rabbi Bab Ada leVava. Rabbi Bab Ada said to Rabbi, Obi Talmidcha, your Talmidim used to say, Omar of Amon, name of Amon, chatos tzibuhi, like Shai wants to put into it, chatos tzibu, v'lo lemisa azla, and it's not chatos shmeisu bal, it's not, it doesn't go to death. Why does chatos tzibu not die? Why not? What's the svor? So one svor you could say it's because it's impossible for a tzibur to die. A tzibur never dies, right? You know how it's tzibur dying. A yochid can die, a tzibur can't die. But others hold because of the fact that you can't do tmuras chatos. Okay, we'll come to it. There's no tmur by tzibur. Tzibur can't do tmur. If let's say the whole of Christ of being a carbon tomid, you can't do tmur because they're always the miskapa. So if it says you can't do tmuras chatos, we said that the 5 are totally of each other. You can't have mesu balei either. So it won't have the same halacha that you lock it up in the room. Rather, you let it voya actually stove. That's the choices to discuss. It's what you should do with it. Okay. So the Maisa is voya actually stove. He's asking what happens. Let's say, for example, by a chatos tzibur where something goes wrong. The halacha is that we voya actually stove. Okay. So now the Gemara answers. What's the central answer? What Shai said. And others was murmuring that this is not a chatos of the Kohen Gadol, it belongs to everybody. Since it belongs to everybody, the fact that Kohen Gadol dies is not a chatos shmeisu ba'aleh. This is going to be the next topic for a long time now. Is it a chatos tzibur or is it not a chatos tzibur? That is the shaila over here. And the Gemara for some reason takes on the position that Rabbi holds it's not a chatos tzibur, and everybody holds it is a chatos tzibur, so it's always a challenge against Rabbi. So that's the Gemara says. So the Gemara says it's a chatos tzibur, and if it doesn't die, Omaloi. So, Ditnan, we'll prove it's a chatos tzibur. How are we going to prove it's a chatos tzibur? We're going to try and prove that at least one man the Oma holds it's a chatos tzibur. You don't need to prove that everybody holds it's a chatos tzibur. As long as you've got one man Doma that holds it's a chatos tzibur, it's enough for us. Why? Because the Gemara earlier said there's a man Doma that says that you can continue the avodah with the blood. How can you continue the avodah with the blood? It's chatos shmeisu ba'aleh. If you've got at least one Tana that holds that's a chatos tzibur, then it doesn't matter. Then that man Doma that says that you can continue with the blood, he holds like the man Doma that's a chatos tzibur. So as long as you find one man Doma that's a chatos tzibur, you're okay, right? As long as you find one man Doma, one Tana that holds a chatos tzibur, we're okay. Because if there's one man Doma that says chatos tzibur, so the man Doma that says that you can carry on with the blood, even though the cow died, the Kohen Gadol died, he will hold that the fact that the Kohen Gadol died doesn't bother us because it's a chatos tzibur, and therefore it's okay. This is this Beis which we're quoting, it's a Beis, not a Mishnah, is a Beis we're only being the second half. The first half is a Yehuda Steinberg that says that every korban sibul is doiche Shabbos and doiche Tumah. We've had it so many times. If you bring a korban sibul, like let's say for example the Musaf of Shabbos, it's doiche Shabbos and it's doiche Tumah. So if we require salotome, you can just bring it with a Tumah, or if it's Shabbos and Yom Tov, korban sibul is doiche Shabbos and it's doiche Tumah. Now we're bringing the second half of the Beis. So we're two Tanoim arguing with the Tanakama, and they're basically arguing the same thing. You said that Korban Sibur is Doich Shabbos and Tumah. It's not true. Even the Korban Yochid can be Doich Shabbos and Tumah. You said the Korban Sibur is Doich Shabbos and Tumah. No, not every Korban Sibur is. There are some Korban Sibur that are not. That means they're both arguing, both taking a tiny half of the statement. He said the Korban Sibur is Doich Shabbos and Tumah, which you can deduce that Korban Yochid is not. One man says it's not true that sometimes the Korban Yochid is Doich Shabbos and Tumah. Another man says sometimes the Korban Sibur is not Doich Shabbos and Tumah. So the two Tanoim are arguing on that first statement of the Tanakh. What's the first statement of the Tanakh? Korban Sibur, Doich Shabbos and Tumah. And there are two ways to argue. Either by saying the Korban Yochid sometimes also is, or sometimes the Korban Sibur doesn't. And what they're both trying to say, it has nothing to do with whether it's a Korban Sibur or Korban Yochid. What does it have to do with? Is Manu Kavua. If it's a fixed time. That means if it's a Korban Sibur, which is not a fixed time, it's not Doich Shabbos and Tumah. If it's Korban Yochid, which is a fixed time, it is Doich Shabbos and Tumah. So your principle that Korban Sibur is Doich Shabbos and Tumah is incorrect. There's nothing to do with Korban Sibur. It's got to do with if it's Kavua Azman. Now we're going to see the second half. We're going to be Medayik to prove that the Korban Sibur, that the Kohen Gadol's power on Yom Kippur is a Chatzat Sibur. Let's see the Tanya. Omar Amir. So Amir says to Tanya, you said that Korban Sibur is Doich Shabbos and Tumah. You're wrong. The power on Yom Kippur. The Chavite Kohen Gadol, and every day the Kohen Gadol has to bring special pancakes. Pesach and the Korban Pesach, the Korban Yochid too. They're all Korbanos Yochid, because at the end of the day, the Kohen Gadol brings his own pancakes. The Korban Pesach, every individual brings the Korban Pesach, yes? But Doich Shabbos and Tumah, pushes away Shabbos and Tumah, is a Raya, La Michla, Dikl the Tzibur. The Gemara understood that the Tanakhama that never liked this objection. What did the Tanakhama say? That Korban Sibur is Doich Shabbos and Tumah. And they came along with a man and said to him, I don't agree with you. I'm going to find you a Korban Yochid that is Doich Shabbos and Tumah. Which cases did they find? One of them was Par Yom Kippur. Now, what did the Tanakhama that never said this objection? What did he hold? No, that's a Korban Sibur. Again.
Or like Pesach.
Like Pesach.
Alongside Pesach.
Okay, we'll cut that more challenges that a bit. Let's get it very clear again. The Tanakhama said all Korbanos Sibur Doich Shabbos and Tumah. Came along a man and said to me, you're wrong. I'm going to find you a Korban Yochid that's Doich Shabbos and Tumah. What's the Korban Yochid that he found him? The cow of Yom Kippur. Now, what did the Tanakhama have to say about that argument? What did he have to say about that argument? That's a Korban Sibur. Is it right? The Tanakhama holds a Korban Sibur, and therefore you ask the question that it's a Chatos Shemeisu Baleo. Answer: it's not a Chatos Shemeisu Baleo because it's a Korban Sibur. Says, well, you're wrong. It can't be that that's what the Tanakhama holds. Why? Diktani, because the Beis continues. Only Rabbi Yaakov, so Rabbi Yaakov continued with the same attacking the Tanakhama. But if Chasson Klal Yisrael forget and they do let's say based on fasting, allowed to eat chaylev, and the whole of Klal Yisrael eat chaylev. Alternatively, we see if Klal Yisrael do Avodah Zarah and after a certain soy, the chagiga and the Kohen chagiga later we more ask why it's Korban Sibur. The Korban Sibur vein doichnes Shabbos v'Shabbos. Michlad dekle mandama de Yochid. Are you going to say that the Tanakhama disagrees and he holds that these are Korbanos Yochid? Of course not. Why can't you say the Tanakhama holds the Korbanos Yochid? Because we're talking about Pahalem Dover Shot Sibur. There's no greater Korban Sibur than the Pahalem Dover Shot Sibur. So obviously, when the Tanakhama disagrees, he's not arguing whether it's a Yochid or Sibur. That can't possibly be the argument. Let's summarize very briefly. But the Shaila, the Kohen Gadol dies after he's shechted. Well, as the Shaila dies, Dover Shot or not. Very more forget about Par and Dover Shot. You have another problem. It's Chatos Shmeisu Ba'aleh. Came along and they said the name of Avram, it's a Chatos Sibur. Bob says it's not. Says the Gemara, we'll prove to you it's a Chatos Sibur. From what? From the fact that they had an argument regarding Doich Shabbos and Tumah. Tanakhama says, Korban Sibur Doich Shabbos and Tumah. The Meir of Yaakov came along and said, no, we found the Korban Yochid that's Doich Shabbos and Tumah, on the Korban Sibur that's not Doich Shabbos and Tumah. The Gemara in the Haramina wanted to say that what did the Tanakhama reply? What was his position regarding the Meir's argument? The Meir said to him that power of Yom Kippur is Doich Shabbos and Doich Tumah, is a raya that the Korban Yochid can also. What did the Tanakhama hold? The Gemara understood that he must hold the Korban Sibur, and it's a raya that's a Korban Sibur, and therefore it's not Polo Chatos Shmeisu Ba'aleh. Says the Gemara, you're completely wrong. The proof is because of the Sefer. Rabbi Yaakov finds a case of a Korban Sibur which is not Doich Shabbos and Tumah. What's the case? Pahalem Dover Shot Sibur. And then you can't say that the Tanakhama's position is that you're wrong, that it's a korban yochid, because there it's impossible to say that panim dovah tzibur is a yochid. So elamai, the argument has nothing to do with whether it's a yochid or tzibur. The argument is it to do with the fact that it's zman kavua, or is it a general rule in tzibur and yochid? Says what says it inside. Can there possibly be somebody that holds the panim dovah tzibur is yochid? Of course not. Elo. The Tanakama Kamahod Ali. The Gemara says they're replying to Tanakama. The Shomi, they heard him to say, the Kama Kaman Sibu Dechas Hashamas Satumum, Kaman Yochid in the Dechas Hashamas Satumum, Omelu Amaya, Kaman Yochid Klolo, is that a rule? Well, the Payim Akipum, Havita King Godu, Pesach, the Kaman Yochid over Dechas Hashamas Satuma, so there's Kaman Yochid which are Decha. Vomel Abyakim Kaman Sibu Klolo, but the Payim Dovish Sibu, the Chom Chagiga, the Kaman Sibu, the all Kaman Sibu in Dechas Hashamas Satuma. And in the Koita Klola Biotcha, the real rule that you should have said is, because Shazbanu Kavua, Dechas Hashamas Satuma, Afilu Beyochid. That means you've got no proof now that anybody holds a panim dovah that panim kippur is a parashat tzibur. Maybe everybody holds it's really only of a yochid. The only argument was, what is the general rule? The way the Torah says it is like this. The Tanakama held that generally korbanos tzibur is kavuas man and korban yochid is not. That's the general rule. 95%, 99% of korbanos tzibur are fixed time, and Korban Yochid died tonight is not. So the Tanakama said it's got to do with Tzibur and Yochid, and they corrected him and they said to him, you're wrong, because there are exceptions to the rule. For example, Panim Dovah Shel Tzibur, if Klal Yisrael do an Aveil, so it's a common for Klal Yisrael, but there's no fixed time. You can bring it today, tomorrow, the next day. So it's not Derech Shabbos. And sometimes you have a Korban Yochid, for example, Korban Pesach, where it's a fixed time. It's the only Korban Yochid which is a fixed time. So therefore, it is Derech Shabbos and Tumah. So they were only arguing in the semantics, so to speak, in what's the Gedad Dvom. Okay. So the Mai said, coming back to the real questions like this, we had the question, if the Kohen Gadol dies, can the next Kohen Gadol continue? And the question was, says the Gemara, forget that problem. You've got a problem of Chatash Ve'Subaleh. Rabbi held of this problem. The Gemara says that Abraham answered. What did Abraham answer? It's a common symbol. The Gemara says, Rabbi never held of that. So Abai asks Rabbi, how can you possibly say it's not a common symbol? I'm going to prove to you it's a common symbol. And you separate another one. All of them shall die. Because he holds that it's a chatos shenevta, which we mentioned before. That we should wait for them to graze and then to be sold. We put them in, and then the money is good for the it's a chatos that's sibur. You can't get a more clear brisa that says clearly that the power of Yom Kippur is what? Is a chatos sibur. Oh. So he said, Amalei. So Rabbi replied, you're wrong. There's no proof. My power, panim dovah shel tzibur. When we said power, we don't mean the power of Yom Kippur, we mean panim dovah shel tzibur. How can you say that? It says clearly, power shel Yom Kippur, power shel Yom Kippur. That's what kikatoni had the soy. Let me take this. You have to read the words by power, referring to the panim dovah shel tzibur. The soy, which kind of soy? Soy of Yom Kippur. The soy of Yom Kippur, everybody agrees it's a shel tzibur. Why does everybody agree that the soy of Yom Kippur is shel tzibur? Because you do video in the entire Klal Yisrael, so everybody agrees the soy. So when the Beis says pa b'soy, we read like this. Pa is referring to the power of Elam Dovah Shel Tzibur, and the soy is referring to the soy of Yom Kippur. You have to change the words of the Beis. Furthermore, that doesn't work either. But Tanya pa shel Yom Kippur, the soy shel Yom Kippur she'avdu. They should all die. You there you can't change the words, because there it says very, very clearly the words pa shel Yom Kippurim, v'soy shel Yom Kippurim, and therefore we've got clear brisa that says that what is it? It's a chat tzibur. So Rabbi replies, lo teima she'en chat tzibur meisa, elema she'en chat shutfin meisa. Meaning like this, that you're right that there's no problem of the fact that it is a chatos shemesu ba'aleh, because over here it's considered a partnership. But you're wrong in calling it a chatos tzibur. It's not a chatos tzibur. You have to magia the brisa, change the words of the brisa. That the chatos of Yom Kippur is not a chatos tzibur, but rather it's chatos shutfin. What difference does it make? Let's go very briefly. So the question is very, very strong. We had a question, Kohen Gadol dies, whether the blood is considered as good as the cow. And we asked the question, who cares about whether the blood is good as the cow? It's chatas shemesu ba'aleh. Rav Avram answered, it's a chatas atzibur. Says, Rav, I don't agree with you, it's not a chatas atzibur. But now you, Rav, are forced to admit that at the very least it's a chatas hashutfin. And the halacha by chatas hashutfin is what? That also we don't say chatas hashutfin shemesu ba'aleh, it's no good, but rather we continue with it. So therefore, why are you, Rav, being so difficult by saying that it's not chatas hatzibur, chatas hashutfin? Either way, the halacha is we do not have the problem of chatas shemesu ba'aleh. Whether it's a chatas hatzibur, let's say, for example, all of us here decide to bring a korban together as a chatas, and then what happens is we get to lost, and then it gets lost, or one of us dies. The fact is, it's not considered chatas shemesu ba'aleh. So if that's the case, what did Rav care to argue that it's not chatas hatzibur, but it's chatas hashutfin? Says, well, nafkemina de maisu kanim pa bohivo. The halacha is that if Klal Yisrael do an avera, because let's say they were told that the Beis of the Sanhedrin, it's actually the successor towards the end, that the Sanhedrin tells them to do something wrong, and then what happens is they do an avera, we bring a param dor shatzibur. What happens if only one shaver does it? What happens if a whole shaver does it? You also bring a param dor shatzibur. There's also going to notice that it's actually possible for the whole Klal Yisrael to bring 13 different let's say the whole Sanhedrin and all the Shvatim, the world of Cheshbonis, how we split it all up. One for the whole of Klal Yisrael, 12 for the 12 Shvatim. The Maisa, every Shevet brings on its own. What happens if all the Kohanim, that means every single Kohen, or at least the majority, the majority of the Kohanim do an Avera. That means the Sanhedrin paskin that you're allowed to do a certain chiyuv kos, let's say allowed to eat pigel, which is kos, and all the Kohanim eat pigel, or where the Kohanim eat pigel, do they bring a param dor shatzibur? That is the question. When Rava heard of Ammon speaking, and Ammon replied that the cow of Yom Kippur, which, as he said earlier, is once a video for the Kohen Gadol and once a video for the whole Shevet Kahuna, and he heard of Ammon saying that the reason it's not a problem chatas shemesu ba'aleh. What did Ammon say? Why is it not a chatas shemesu ba'aleh? Because it's simple. Rava said, no, don't say that. If you say that, chas v'sholem, one day, if the Kohanim make a mistake, then what will happen is they'll bring a chatos, and it's not true that the Kohanim bring an avera, they do not bring a part of the shatzibur. It's an amazing story. It's brought down it's brought down in a man called the Netziv. It's actually from the previous. It's from the Dosh Kodesh Sefer. That what happened was, it's not Rabbi Netziv, it's Rabbi Chavalosha, that he had a daughter called Plima. And what happened was, he once wrote her a letter, and then after he sent the letter with his son, I think it was called, he asked him to bring it back. And his son had asked his father permission, or read it, whatever way he read it. And we wrote it, sent it again. And he asked him the second time, I don't understand, I read the letters both times, there's not a single difference between the first and second letter. Why did he send me back? He says, because I write my daughter Plimi. And I was scared that one day someone would get divorced, and they would have a shaila how to spell it. And I wanted to make sure that it's spelled the correct way by Gittin. And what happened was, he felt that it was being a bit OCD for school nowadays. Years later, he met somebody that said that there was a get in that town, and they didn't know how to spell Plima or something. And what happened was, they said, oh, the daughter of Chaim Volozhin is in town. Let's ask her, does she have any letters from her father? And they use the letter from the father as a source, as an extra thing. They do it very, very lot, by the way. Many times they'll find another person, and just now regarding the word Hershey, with the ein or without ein, Hershey, right? Hershey, Hey, Shin Yud, or with an ein, right? Many times they look for a thing. And the point is, you see that the Rabbi was worried that Ammon's speech by saying that Sachatas Hatzibur will come to a huge problem. Because by saying that it's a Chatas Hatzibur, it's not going to be a problem. So Shabbat, we're going to continue with this Shaila whether it's a Chatas Hatzibur or not. The boy of Allah. We're up to Nun on Beis top line. If your whole Payim Kippur is a Korban Yochid, does it do Tmur or does it not do Tmur? That's his Shaila. If it's a Korban Yochid, do you do Tmur or not? We'll discuss it in a minute. When he said, according to the man Damad, it's a Yochid, obviously there was another man Damad that holds that's a Tzibur. Look, there's a man Damad that holds that's Shutfin. So the Maisa, we have absolutely no raya as to whether the Chatas of Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur is it a Chatas at Tzibur, it is a Chatas at Shutfin, or a Chatas of a Yochid. There's three Shutters. Rava holds it's a Chatas at Shutfin, Rav Ammon holds it's a Chatas at Tzibur, and the others holds it's a Chatas at Yochid.
Gufa. The words Shemesu ba'aleh, do you mean in the schapa or the?
Oh, it's mamish the Gemara's next shaila. Gufa, Yishav L'chaim. Gufa, boy of Yolosa. The divo even Payim Kippur Korban Yochid. Oiset Tzibur, Oiset Tzibur. Does it do Tamur or not do Tamur? It works sense. That means like this. Over here, who does the cow belong to, by the way? Who does the cow belong to? No, it belongs to God. The God. Rashi Pashachim says that the God had to pay for it from his own money, right? Had to buy a cow. So what happens is he's the Makdish. Who's the Miskapa? The whole Shevet Kodah. So the Shaila is regarding Tamur. The halacha is Tamur only takes place if it's an individual. That means if I bring an Olah myself and I do Tamur one to the other, I can do Tamur. But let's say I decide to be called Olah together with you. You're allowed to bring an Olah with Shutfus. And then we both choose this animal as an Olah. Then I come up to it, even if the two of us together come up to it and say that this should be instead of this, it doesn't work. There's no Tamur. So the Gemara's Shaila at this stage is, can you do Tamur on the Kav Yom Kippur? Do we go after the one who was a Makdish, which was the Kohen Gadol, or do you go after the one who was Miskapa? I want to talk a tiny bit about Tamur. The halacha is it's allowed to do Tamur. You're not allowed to do Tamur. You're not allowed to do Tamur. So, for example, let's say I've got a sheep, and for example, let's say I look at the sheep and I see it's not as strong and it's not as beautiful as it was when I was Makdish it originally. Yes, I Makdish it this week. A month later, it started to look a bit tired and not as fat. So I take a much fatter sheep and I say that one should be instead. First of all, I've been over a lav. I've done a lav. Second of all, both sheep are Kodesh. That's a special halachas of Tamur. Says the Gemara, if the shaila is, does it go after the Makdish and Miskapa? That can't be. Makabi Boile says, well, that can't be. Pshita, the boss of Miskapa, or Zdin, you go after Miskapa. We've always said on three halachas, where the common denominator of all three halachas is referring to cases where one person generously decides to pay up somebody else's debt. Let's get it very clear, Moshe. You got to clear three cases where one person is trying to pay up somebody else's debt. Let's say, for example, I come to your house, Moshe, and I see you brought in a huge amount of grain from Eretz Yisrael. I feel bad for you. You have to take 2 ices. So what do? I take out of my car a big suitcase full of grain, and I take 2 ices from my grain on your grain. Right, that's a nice, generous gesture. Would you be grateful? Why not? No, it does work. As long as I put it together, yeah, of course it works. I'm doing it for you. I'm doing you a favor. Now, instead of you taking 2 ices on your grain, right, I did it for you. Now, let's say, for example, we have to give it to a Kohen. So now we have an argument, who can choose which Kohen should give it to? Who would you say should choose it? It's your, you add, let's say, 100 kilo of grain. I bring in 1 kilo of grain. Tomorrow you can do 150 of it, or so. Let's say I take 2 kilos, which are 50th. And now go Shaila to give it to Shua, to Shaya, to go different Kohanim. No, wait a second. Who decides, me or you? Why you? Why Roiv? Where's the Roiv? So we've got 3 Shailas over here, all to do when one person decides to pay up somebody else's debt. And Rabbi Yochanan Paskas regarding all 3. And one of them is the Shaila we have over here regarding Timur. Makdish ways of Chemish. There's a special halacha that if you're Makdish something, you add a 5th. This halacha is by many, many things. Let's say I'm Makdish my own house. The halacha is you can Makdish your house to the base to Bedek Habayis. What happens is they evaluate my house. My house is worth at least £1 million, right? It's got some sfoim, beautiful couches. Those shailas worth £1 million. So what happens is, if I want to be paid to it, how much do I have to pay? Anybody know? 1.25. Do you guys have to 1.25? Let's say.
Can you Latinada instead?
No, you can't Latinada.
Now, get 25%.
Yeah.
Right. Now let's say you want to be paid in my house, you only pay $1 million. Now let's say David decides he says, I hear him standing and I hear him saying, I'm going to bring a korban oila. I'm going to bring a korban oila. I hear him saying it. So I decide to do him a favor. I take a sheep and I say, this sheep should be for David's oila. And now it got a mum. Since it got a mum, it needs to be redeemed. Now let's say it's evaluated at £100. One of us wants to redeem it. Who has to pay the extra 5th, which is 25% because it's always 5th above? Does David have to pay it? Because at the end of the day, he was the one that was decided to bring the oil and I was makdish for. He said, because I was makdish. So I was makdish a korban for him. Says Rabbi Yochanan, makdish with of chemish. So again, let's get the case very, very clear. If, let's say, David decides to bring a korban oil, I set aside a sheep for him, and then he gets a mum. If he redeems it, he only pays the exact price, £100. If I redeem it, I pay 125 because I was the makdish. Let's say, for example, somebody did an aveh. I see somebody doing an aveh on Shabbos. So I set aside a korban for him. And then one of us wants to do Tamur. It's the one that is miskaper chooses to do Tumor, the opposite of the Magdish. By Moisef Chomesh, it's got to do with the Magdish. Regarding the halachas of Tumor, it's the Miskapa. Rashi brings Psukim. And finally, so if I take Tumas and Mises on somebody else's crop, I'm the one who's entitled to choose which coin to give it to. I can sell it. I can sell the rights for which coin I should give it to. It's my choice. 3 halachas when you take over somebody else's position. Hamakdish has to add the 5th. Biskapa does Tumor, and the he chooses which coin. It's very logical because at the end of the day, I took Tumas on your produce. I can choose which coin. Now, the shayla is over here. Well, we've got the power of Yom Kippur. Who's the Biskapa? Or the Kohanim? Who's the Magdish Kohen Gadol? So regarding Tumor, if you've got more than one person, you can't do Tumor. So over here, can you do Tumor on the power of Yom Kippur?
No, because you have to do Miskapa.
That's clearly you can't. Why? Because it goes after the Biskapa. The Biskapa is definitely more than one person. It's the entire Shevet Kuna. If it's a entire Shevet Kuna, you certainly can't do Tumor. Says more. No, the Gemara's got a different shayla. Loila b'shit was Biskapa osin. V'achi coming b'oli. Echad ha'konim b'kvius Biskapa. The Gemara's got a complicated shayla over here. And that is like this. Normally, when you have a miskapa, the miskapa gets a part of the korban, and what happens is he then is allowed to do the tumor. So to speak, he has the power to do tumor. Over here, since the Kohen Gadol, the Torah tells him again and again, he should take the tumor, the makdashit, and he does video for himself completely before even the other Kohanim get a look in. The Gemara's got a shayla bekufya. The word kufya means from the floating, from superficial. That means maybe the Kohanim that get the kapora, they don't get a kapora like a normal miskapa, but the Kohen Gadol's cow on Yom Kippur, the kapora that they get is only a superficial kapora, and therefore, even though normally regarding Tumor, what do we say? That miskapa is a Tumor. Regarding the Kohen Gadol's cow, we say that only the Kohen Gadol does Tumor. Maybe the Kohen Gadol's cow is different from all other miskapa is Tumor, in the sense that it's the Kohen Gadol's cow, he does video for himself completely, and only later the Kohanim, so to speak, they latch on, but they don't really get a proper part of the korban that they should be able to do Tumor. Toshema. The Mishnah compares the halachas of the original korban to the Tumor. Mentioned before, you've got korban A, which you are makdish, korban B, which you did Tumor to. The Mishnah finds certain of the chumras in the original korban and certain of the chumras in the Tumor. And the Mishnah goes in detail. What's the chumras in the zevach? The halacha is that you can be makdish a korban by yourself, you can bring an oila by yourself, you can bring an oila, the whole of Klal Yisrael, every day, bring the korban tomid, the whole of Klal Yisrael. But Tumor only exists by a yochid. You can't do Tumor by itself. So that's a chumra in the original korban. The halacha is that a korban, the original korban, is doiches Shabbos and Tumor. So let's example, I bring a korban tomid, or I bring a korban Pesach. The halacha is can be doiches Shabbos and Tumor. But let's say I do Tumor from the korban Pesach onto something else. That korban, you don't bring it on Shabbos and Tumor. So you've got a chumra in the original versus the Tumor, which is only the substitute. And the third chumra is that the original korban can do Tumor. Mash'enkin b'Tumor. A Tumor, you can't do Tumor on the Tumor. So let's say I make this korban oila, and I make this into a Tumor. I can't then afterwards make the third korban a Tumor on the Tumor. There's no such thing as Tumor on the Tumor. So somebody would ask you, what are the 3 chumras by a normal korban over Tumor? Get it very, very clear in your minds. First chumra is that it works by tzibur and yochid. Second chumra is doiches Shabbos and Tumor. Why? That means it's got more power, it's got more kedusha that it can create a Tumor. And the third one, it can create a Tumor, but a Tumor can't. So you've got 3 chumras in the original korban, which a Tumor doesn't have. And now we're going to find the chumra by korban. Chumra b'tum b'zebach. Shatzmor chola b'amon kavua, ve'inu yotze lechulin negozes v'le'ovid ma'ashinkin b'zebach. Let's get very clear. The halacha is like this. If I makdish a sheep, a kosher, a tamim sheep, unblemished, and after it becomes a Baal Mum. That means originally it had no mum, and then it becomes a mum. Can you imagine such a thing? What's the halacha? The halacha is, I redeem it. Right? Imagine on Sunday I was makdish a sheep, it had no blemishes. On Monday it got a big mum, a split lip. The halacha is that I'm poid of it. After I'm poid of it, I give the money to buy another sheep. What do I do with the original sheep? The halacha is, since it was once kaddish for a korban, even after you purge it, you're limited in what you can do with it. All you're allowed to do with it is eat it. You're not allowed to shear it, and you're not allowed to work it. It's a very, very important halacha. You're not allowed to shear or work. You're not allowed a sheep that was originally a korban. You're not allowed to. Let's say I take an animal which has already got a bloom, or mum. What's an animal which has got a mum? It's already got a split lip. It's already got a split lip. And I go up to it and I say, this sheep which has a split lip should be a korban olam. So what do? I redeem it, and I'm allowed to work with it, and I'm allowed to shear it. Why? What's the difference? It never became kaddish for mizbeach. It never for one day had kedushas mizbeach. Right. Here we have a special chumrah by Tamur. This is a very special chumrah we have by Tamur. What's the chumrah? If this animal is unblemished, a normal korban olam, and this animal is already blemished, it's already got a split lip, and I go up to this animal and I say, this animal which is blemished should be Tamur aseh. It should be a Tamur. The halacha is that this animal of the Tamur can never be worked and never sheared, even after I'm point of it. Why? This is a chumrah in Tamur, because the Torah says that even when you do good to bad, and bad means a Baal Mum, it's got the halachas of Tamur. So this is the only case, well, this is actually the case, we have other cases, but it's one of the cases where you can have a sheep that always had a mum, and I can never work it. If it would have been originally a korban, I would have said, since I never, let's get to very, very, very briefly again. If I make this a sheep that never had a mum, then he gets a mum, and I'm proud of it, I'm never allowed to work it or shear it. I'm only allowed to eat it. If it had a mum originally when I was makdish it, and then I'm proud of it, I'm allowed to work it, I'm allowed to shear it, it's like proper chuluk. By Tamura, there's an extra chumrah that if it had a mum originally, and I make it Tamur, you cannot work with it and you can't get rid of it. Let's do it inside once more. Even if it's a proper mum. Now, the Gemara at this stage understood that when we compare the chumras of Zebach to Tamur, we just compared 3 chumras in a normal korban over Tamur, 1 chumrah of a Tamur over korban. We want to find a case where you have all the chumras together. That means not like once by oila, once by chatos. We want to find one korban where everything applies. Everything we just said applies. So let's find one korban. Says the Gemara. What we talk about? If we're talking about, let's say, normal korban yochid, let's say shlomim. I decided to be a korban shlomim. Midach Shabbos and Tumah. It's not Dech Shabbos and Tumah. And one of the 3 things was the chumrah of a korban over Tumah is that's Dech Shabbos and Tumah. So we can't be talking about a normal korban yochid. We'll see. Elo did Sibul. Pashas will talk about korban Sibul. Mio said Tamur. Of course, it doesn't do Tamur because korban Sibul doesn't do Tamur. So therefore, you can't have the 3 chumras over the one. Elo lav the power. We'll talk about the power of Yom Kippur, and you've got all 3 chumras. It's got Tamur because the kohanim are only in the skapa b'kufya, only from a latchon, and it's got the chumrah of Derech Shabbos and Tumah, and it's got the chumrah that it's with Sibul Yochid. Says the Gemara, lav the power. The Shabbos and Tumah, the Kviya Lezman, Voice the Tumah, the Tumah, the Korban Yochidu. We're talking about the ram of Aaron Kohen, which is the korban oila of Yom Kippur, which is Derech Shabbos and Tumah, and it's by Yochid and by Tzibur, because it's oila by Tzibur, and it does Tumah. Hachad Mistaba, this Akadat the Povoi, Tzibur the Pa, Shabbos and Tumah the Dachi Bechol Makriv. If we're talking about the cow of Yom Kippur, so we're saying that it's not Derech Shabbos and Tumah the Tzibur. Or Bechol Mikv Kova. Would you even bring it on a weekday? What's the halach of Tmuas Chatos? What did we say before? What's the halach of Tmuas Chatos? One of the 5 of the Timno. So if it's one of the 5 Tmuas Chatos, you don't bring it not Shabbos, not Yom Tov, not weekday, not Tumah, never. So Mikv Kova, Tmuas Chatos to be Sozlo. Says, well, my Tmuah, shame Tmuah. The more now retracts and we says, when we say a Chumrah, we mean the concept of Tmuah. So if that's the case, let's talk about the concept of Zevach, and we should say like this. The concept of the original korban has 3 chumras. Yochid and Tzibur makes Tamur, Shabbos and Tumah. The fact that you can't find all 3 in one case doesn't bother us. Just like by Tamur, we said, we're talking about the concept of Tamur. It says, Shem Zevach Loikatoni. We're not talking about the concept of Zevach. Why? Mimai. We said there's a special chumrah by Tamur. What was the chumrah by Tamur, which doesn't exist by a korban? That even if it was originally a Baal Mum, you can't be put to it to become proper chulin. The cholin Baal Mum kavua vein yotzin lechulin negozes belovid. And we're going to stop here. I'm just going to explain. The Gemara says that when we're talking about Shem Zevach, we don't mean any korban. We need to find one korban that has all three chumras. Because if you're going to say we mean any korban, then the truth of the matter is Tamur is not more chumra than Zevach. Because there are two korbanos which this chumra, which we found by Tamur, exists by those two korbanos. For example, a korban, an animal has a firstborn. What's the halacha of the firstborn? It's a bechor. What happens if that bechor was born with a blemish, was born with a split lip? What's the halacha? Then even when you're proud of it, you're not allowed to share it. Or maisa. Let's say you put 100 sheep in your pen, in your enclosure, and you let them out, and the 10th one you splash with a piece of paint. And the 10th one was a Baal Mum. What's the halacha? It's got proper kedusha, and you can never share it and work it, even after you're proud of it. So therefore, when we talk about the chumrah of Tamur v'zevach, we don't mean the chumrah of Tamur over all zvachim. We mean the chumrah of Tamur over a specific zevach. So therefore, if that's the case, we have to designate which zevach. The Gemara gave two choices so far: either the power of Yom Kippur or the ram of Yom Kippur. The power of Yom Kippur, you gain what? That it's a common symbol. It's a common of Kanana Kayan. But it does Tamur. Why does it do Tamur? Because they kind of more miskaf and mekufia because they lachon. Or we talk about the Eila of Yom Kippur, where because it's an ayel of an oila, but the fact is it's not a kapos, therefore it's shaykh to Tamur because it belongs to the common yochid. Okay, we'll carry on. Well, actually, a bit of a sugya because it's a short daf. We'll carry on tomorrow with Hashem. Today's daf was a particularly challenging one. The fact that if you found it hard, it's a lot of different concepts, a lot of different ideas. And the main thing is to get the ideas clear. It does get much easier with Hashem. Much easier. That's and everything.
Is a right to not only to tomorrow as well, goes back onto that subject as well.
No, I never learned that. No, I learned it's completely separate. Why would it be about that? Because
no, I was asking, when I asked you before, you said that. It's tomorrow. Well, that's like about tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow.
I'm asking back on